Hello class, thank you for tuning in to Professor Choi again. Today we're going to be traveling down the road of probabilities, and this is going to be my first video in a few ones talking about probabilities. So I'm calling it Introduction to Probabilities video number 1. Alright, now probabilities is actually something that can be very confusing to a lot of people, but it's very fun in statistics because it's really what a lot of people use statistics for, which is kind of like to visualize the future or to try to figure out something in the future, or if you're a casino, try to figure out whether you're going to make money or not by assigning probabilities, or if you're, for example, an insurance company, a car insurance company, then what's the probability that somebody's going to have an accident this year or not. Alright? One of the real life examples in the year 2020, for example, with COVID-19, is that a lot of car insurance companies have figured out that people are not driving as much, and therefore they can assign a lower probability of having a crash on that particular year. As a consequence of that, some insurance companies have started to give people some money back, and some insurance companies have started to quote people at a lower number. And the reason for that, again, is simply because we're not driving as much as we used to, and therefore the probability of you having an accident is lower. Okay? So therefore they won't have to spend as much money cash sending money out, therefore they can charge you a little lower money. Okay? Alright, so in any case, let's kind of like move forward with this subject of probabilities. The first thing is to try to explain what exactly is a probability. So a probability is a value between 0 and 1 inclusive. In other words, it has to stay within 0 and 1. You cannot go beyond 1 or below 0. So there is no such a thing as 110% probability. 100 is where it stops. Okay? Now, for the purpose of classes and whenever you're going to take statistics class or something like that, then normally the professor will be using decimals to talk about probabilities. So probabilities will be expressed between 0 and 1. Now, if you're out there and somebody's talking about probabilities, then they will normally use percents. So 0 basically means 0%, 0.5 means 50%, and 1 means 100%. Now, to understand a little bit about what exactly is a probability, 1 is the probability of a chance of rain in the state of Florida during any particular year. So in other words, if somebody says, what's the probability that it's going to rain in the state of Florida in the year 2021? Then somebody would say, well, the probability of rain any time in the year, 100%, or 1. Why? Because it could be any day of any moment in the year 2021. And by the way, in Florida, it rains 50% of the year. Now, not all over the state, but anywhere in the state, half the year, somewhere it's raining. So believe it or not, Florida is the rainiest state in the nation. Alright. Now, rainiest state, by the way, not city, county, or something like that, state. Alright, now, this is an example of another type of probability. So imagine that I take a two-faced coin and I throw it. And then, what is the probability that you're going to land a tail on a single coin toss? Well, the probability is 0.5 because you could either land a tail or you could land a head. Alright? So probability is 0.5. Alright, now what is the chance that the sun is going to disappear this particular year? Well, the chance is so low that we could say it's almost 0. Alright, now if you're a statistician or if you're like, I don't know, like me, where you would like to be very careful every time you say something, a particular statement, then you don't want to be saying 0 because 0 basically says that if for whatever reason 1 happens, then you're in trouble. So you want to give a really low probability, something like, I don't know, 0.0001% or 0.0001 or something, and then that would basically be like 0, but at least you leave that probability there that it's going to happen. Alright? Now, astronomers say that the sun would eventually disappear and we won't be able to live in the solar system anymore, but that's going to happen really long time from now. So the probability that it's going to be, say, next year, it's very low. Almost 0. Alright, so that's kind of like the way you assign probabilities. I wanted to remind you how to kind of like translate probabilities from percent to decimals. So something like 1% is the same thing as saying 1 out of 100 or 0.01. Something like 50% is the same thing as saying 50 over 100 or 0.5. And something like 70% is the same thing as saying 70 over 100 or 0.7. Now this is normally the way people talk about probabilities. They use percentages. And this is normally the way we talk about probabilities in classes. We use decimals. Okay? Now you got to be able to kind of like move them around very quickly, because if your professor is asking you about it, it's going to be in a decimal. But if a friend is asking you about it, you might want to say it in percent, otherwise they get the wrong idea. Okay? Now of course, every time you say it in percent, you say percent at the end. So if I say 0.01, then I didn't say percent, then it's a decimal. If I say 1%, then it means 0.01. Alright, so there are three basic ways that you assign probability. One way is what we call the classical way. Now classical is used a lot in classes to kind of explain how probabilities work, and it's also one of the, it assumes that all outcomes are equally likely to happen. And this is kind of like the biggest assumption of classical probability, is that every event is equally likely to happen. There might be times where this is not the case, and therefore that's not the best way to assign probability. Empirical. Empirical uses history. So it assumes that the past can tell the future, and therefore what you do is you look at historical data to kind of like use that in order to introduce a probability for the future. So you base your probability on the past, and that's what we call empirical probability. A lot of the time when people are trading stocks, for example, they like to use these quote-unquote technical analysis, which what it does is it uses graphs and moving averages, for example, to try to figure out where the direction of things are happening. Now again, the biggest assumption here is that history can tell the future. So in other words, you're taking the point where you're saying, okay, well, the history of this can tell me where the future is going to go, which may or may not be true. Alright, the last one is what we call subjective probability. Now subjective probability uses any sort of available information, and this is where expertise is important, because anyone can assign any sort of probability to anything, and the question that you always have to ask is, what did you use in order to assign that, or what is the method in order to assign that? Okay? Now let's go through a basic example of how to assign the same thing, three different probabilities. Alright, so I'm a fan of the Miami Dolphins, and I don't really know why. I love the team. I watch them all the time whenever we're playing, and you know, we keep talking about 1972 and the undefeated season, and it's really like, you know, it's wearing on me, but I can still watch the team because it's closer than Tampa, so I really have no choice. Alright, now Tampa, it's a really interesting pick for 2020-2021, and if you don't know why, just go ahead and Google it. But in any case, I'm still kind of like gonna go with the Dolphins because that's closer to me. Alright, so in any case, let's say that somebody asks me, what is the probability the Dolphins win the Super Bowl next time around? This year. Alright? So somebody asked me, hey, you're a statistician, man, come up with a probability to, what's the probability that the Dolphins are going to win the Super Bowl this year? Okay? Well, we have three different ways of assigning this probability, and this is where it starts getting fun. Alright, so let's use the first way, classical way. Now the classical way assumes that all outcomes are equally likely. Okay? So it makes the assumption that every team is an equally likely team, and therefore it is a game of chance winning the Super Bowl. We know this is not true. In other words, we know that a particular team with a good quarterback, good offensive line, good defense, so fairly good defense can get you to a Super Bowl better than a team with a really bad quarterback and horrible defense, for example. Okay, so therefore the team makes a difference, and classical probability is not the best way to assign probability, but again, I'm trying to explain to you the 3 different ways. So let's do it the first way, okay? So for the first way, there are 32 teams in the NFL, and the Dolphins is one of them. So the chance that they're going to win the Super Bowl is 1 out of 32. And 1 out of 32 is equal to 0.03125, which is the same thing as saying 3.125%. And that is the way to assign probability using classical. Okay? There you go. Now, second way. The second way uses history. It assumes that the past translates into the future. Well, let's use the last 10 years. Okay? How many times have the Dolphins won the Super Bowl in the last 10 years? The answer is 0. Well, let's use the last 20 years. Okay? So, since the year 2000, how many times have the Dolphins won the Super Bowl? And the answer is 0. So, basically, the chance that the Dolphins are going to win the Super Bowl is 0 out of the last 20 years. Therefore, the probability is 0, because they haven't done it in the last 20 years. Alright, now, probability number 3. Now, the probability number 3 is subjective. So, it uses any kind of available information, and depends on whether you're an expert or not, you can assign a probability for that. Now, I think the Dolphins are better than about 10 teams or so on the NFL. So we're not, average, we're like slightly below average. So I think we could definitely defeat a few more teams than most other people. So, we should have a 500 season, a half and half season where we win about half the games or so. If that is the case, then I'm going to say that 1 out of half of the NFL teams, so 1 out of 16 is what I think is our chance. So that puts it at 0.0625 or 6.25%. Alright? Now, as you saw, by the way, my third way of doing it could basically be anybody. Even though I am a fan, I am definitely not a hardcore fan, so there's a lot of stuff I don't know about NFL football teams, and I got a bunch of friends who are way better than me. So you should not be using this to make any kind of bet or anything. Alright? Now this right here is the classical way of doing things. This right here is the empirical way of doing things. And this right here is a subjective way of assigning probabilities. Okay? So, thank you for tuning in to Professor Choi, and I hope you like my introduction to probabilities 1. Have a good one.